Alrighty, welcome back, and in this video we're going to be deploying the back end of our little mini social network. And before we get started, I want to say that I'm going to be typing out a lot of commands and configuration files, so on and so forth in this video. However, don't worry about like pausing the YouTube video and copying them. I'll leave a link to the entire guide in the description below, and if it's not in the description below for some reason, then it'll be on the GitHub repo. So either way, yeah, just want to mention that you can just copy and paste them all. So with that being said, I'll actually go ahead and walk you through real quick what we're going to be doing. So we're of course going to be deploying our backend, and for our static files, not only the static files for like Django admin, but we're also going to be storing the image files for that social network, because remember, the social network allows people to upload pictures of recipes and food and stuff. So all of those are going to be being stored in an S3 bucket that we're going to configure in just a second. Now, once that's configured, then we're going to be setting up our EC2 instance, and this is what's going to be the server for that Docker config, both the database and the application server that we're going to be running. And from there, we're going to be setting up an elastic IP to point to this. And that's because whenever you restart an EC2 instance, it actually has a different IP address each time. So since we want to keep that the same so we can set up our domain name, that's why we need elastic IP. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that this setup right here, it isn't like the final version of how we're going to be structuring everything. Because in a production environment, what you usually want to do is, instead of just pointing to one instance, then you can point to a load balancer, and then that way you can have multiple EC2 instances and kind of distribute the load that way, scale horizontally. And also right now, we're going to be hosting that Postgres database right on this EC2 instance. However, it's typically a better idea to use another service like RDS. And that way, if you have multiple EC2 instances, then they can all communicate with it, because of course you don't want like 3 separate databases if you have 3 instances. But either way, for this tutorial series, what we can do is kind of like get this up and running, and then we'll go back and figure out how to optimize everything and structure things differently. I just think it's easier that way rather than just like trying to do everything all at once. It can become a little bit overwhelming. So baby steps, we'll get there to the final production build. But yeah, for right now, this is a good pathway there. So with that being said, the first thing actually before I hop into any of this AWS stuff is, if you go into this project under scripts and you click production data, just go ahead and run this. And then this is going to generate all of the information that you can use. So this sign-in key and account number, this is going to be for setting up your super user that can log into Django admin. And the secret key is just going to be, of course, the Django secret key. But anyways, go ahead and generate some new ones of those. And I have a little scratch file to the right of my screen. I just want to go ahead and save those. And then, yeah, just kind of getting everything ready right now. All right. So again, the first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to set up this S3 bucket. And we just need to pretty much create one and change the permissions on it so we can actually write to it. But for other people, they need to be able to read from it, because there are going to be images here of food, and people, of course, they need to be able to read those files to see the images. So how do we do all this? Well, before we can even create that bucket, what we need to do is we need to create a new user, because what's going to happen is, I'll show you real quick. So we're going to create a new user that has command line access, pretty much like a new AWS user, and they're going to have permissions to write to this bucket. And we just don't want to use our regular user right here. So we can set up a special user, and then we'll use the access keys to pretty much configure everything in Django. So for now, I'm just going to click add user, and I will say for the username, I'll say penguin user, and that is because the domain name that I want to use to set this up is penguin chess. So let me just say penguin chess user. Now, because this is like a programmed user and they're not going to be actually someone like a human being logging in, we don't need to provide them access to the AWS management console. So we can just go ahead and click next. And the policies, if you click right here for the permissions, attach policies directly, the policies that I want to attach is actually just one, and that is Amazon S3 full access. So this has this user has permission to pretty much do anything with S3. It's exactly what we want. So from here, go ahead and click next. And then this is looking good. You can just go ahead and click create user. It is creating, and then where are you at? All right, Penguin Chess user. And I know this is kind of confusing because the social network is for like sharing recipes and uploading pictures of food. And this is like Penguin Chess user, but hey, it's the domain name that I had. So yeah, we'll just roll with that right now. All right, so anyways, what I did is I clicked on the user because now that we have one created, we just need to, well, you'll see. In security credentials, I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to create an access key. And whenever I hit create access key, that's going to allow this user to pretty much like log into AWS from our Django app, more or less. So we can select application running on AWS compute. And then we can go down here and click next. Yes, I understand. I want to create one. And for this tag, I don't even think we need one, or do we? Yep, we're good. All right. So for the access key, make sure to copy that in your little scratch pad on the right. I'm just gonna label these and paste that in. And now for the secret access key, just label this so I know what it is. I'm gonna go ahead and show this and copy this one as well. By the way, it is not usually a good idea to create these keys and then show them on YouTube for the world to see. However, I'm going to be deleting these right after this tutorial, so it's good. But yeah, of course you want to keep the secret private and yeah, not show it to everyone. But now that we have a user that can pretty much be configured in our Django app, what we can do now is create that S3 bucket. So I'm going to click S3, and then I'm just going to create a brand new bucket, and I'll say Penguin Chess. Let's see, because we're going to have another bucket to host the website, I'll say Penguin Chess Backend, and I want to keep this one word, Penguin Chess Backend. All right. Now for the region, this is fine. You typically want to pick a region that's closest to you or the people who are going to be reading these files. However, for this tutorial, it doesn't really matter that much. And then for block all public access, I actually want to uncheck this because we're going to be having images in there that we need the public to be able to read. So of course you don't want to block them because that's the entire point. And yes, I acknowledge, and I believe that is all we need. Let me check, and all right, great bucket. And now that our bucket is created, let me go ahead and actually click into that Penguin Chess Backend, a little bit of a tongue twister. And then this is pretty much just like a folder, basically. But now we need to update the permissions on it to say that anyone is allowed to get the images in here. So what I'm going to do to enable that is click on permissions after you clicked into your bucket. And at the very bottom here, you should see this section right here, cross-origin resource sharing. If you just go ahead and edit this and then paste in this configuration, that's pretty much what this is allowing. I'm going to allow anyone to get the stuff inside this bucket. We're not going to have any private files, just images in here. So yep, there you go. And then go ahead and save those changes. And now our bucket is good to go. And actually, before you close out of this tab, go ahead and copy the bucket name and stick that in your Scratch file too. Bucket name. And the reason that we need this is because whenever we configure our EC2 instance to pretty much write these files, then it needs to know what bucket it's writing to. So with that being said, we can now move on and start setting up our EC2 instance. So from here, go ahead and go to your EC2 section. And actually what I want to do is I want to switch over to Oregon. And yeah, so okay. Now, actually the region you want, again, it's going to be closest to you, but this is where I have all my other ones. And just go ahead and click in instances, because we want to click this button right here to launch a new instance. And for the name it something that is relevant to your application. But for this, I'll say Penguin Chess Core. And the operating system that we want, I'm actually going to search for Ubuntu, because I'm looking for the second option right here, Ubuntu Server 20.04 LTS, HVM, and then this one is good too by default, 64-bit x86. Select that. And now once that is selected, just make sure, yep. What we can do here is just review this. The micro or the tiniest one is fine. Now go ahead and select the key pair that you want to use. Mine is this one. I'm on my new iMac. It actually isn't that new anymore, but at the time I made that key pair it was. Now for network settings, what we want to do is of course allow SSH, so we can SSH and configure everything. Allow HTTPS, and we also want to allow HTTP. And the reason that we want to allow both of these is because whenever we are setting up our certificate, as part of that like a verification process, it's going to reach out to our server. And because we don't have HTTP yet, HTTPS yet, because like that's what we're in the process of doing, enabling that, it needs to communicate over HTTP. So anyways, that's the story behind why you need both of these. But make sure that these are all checked, and I think that's all we need. So go ahead and launch this bad boy, and then just wait until it's ready. All right, so it says it launched it, but now click back in your instances. You can see that it's probably still pending right here. So just wait a few minutes until it is up and running, and then we will be ready to move on to the next step. All right, so that took less than like 30 seconds. But anyways, go ahead and click into it whenever it's running. And now you're going to be able to see the public IP address. And this is where we can SSH into. So go ahead and make sure that's copied. And now pop open a terminal and SSH. And the username is Ubuntu at the IP address to enter. And yes, everything's good. And we are in. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do to kind of start setting things up is just update the package index and upgrade packages. So that's again sudo apt update, this command right here. All right, and then once that's done, the next thing that we're going to be doing is installing a couple different things: Docker, Git, Nginx, certbot. Basically just a bunch of different packages that we're going to be needing. So go ahead and run that as well. All right, looking nice, looking nice. So after this, what we need to do is we need to download the Docker GPG key. And what this is used for is to verify the authenticity of the Docker packages during installation. So just go ahead and run that. Should take like a fraction of a second. Then after this, we are going to add the Docker repository entry to the system's software sources list. So pretty much we have a new place to download from. And then after this, since we updated that, we just need to run sudo apt update again. And then once that is done and we got our sources updated, we can run this command to actually install some of the Docker related tools. Beautiful. Okay, so now that those are done, this command right here is going to allow us to install Docker Compose. And then once we have that installed, we need to actually make it executable so we can run it from the command line. And that's what this command is doing right here. And then from there, what we want to do is we want to add your user to the Docker group. So click enter and do it with this command. And now that they are added, what we need to do is we can just go ahead and exit this and then SSH back in, and then that's going to pick up all your updated permissions. So now, once we log in again, we are going to be good to go. Our users added to the Docker group. And from here, the next step is we can actually clone our application from GitHub. So to do this, it is this command. Again, it was in my the New Boston developers organization under a repo called Cooking Core. So just go ahead and clone that. And then once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and cd into that directory. And then from here, we need to go ahead and create that .env file. So you can actually just touch this since it doesn't exist, but no, it doesn't hurt to test its existence first. All right, so now we have that .env file created. And now what we need to do is pretty much make the equivalent of this, but for production. So we're gonna create a local directory, and then we're gonna write pretty much settings.prod.py. So in order to do that, if you do make dir -p local, and then from here, once we have that, we can just create a new file by sudo nano in that directory called settings.prod.py. And now in here, this is what we're going to be pasting in. So check it out. So debug false, that's what we want. Now for our secret key, let me see what one I generated in my scratch file. All right, so replace the secret key with your secret key. And then for these trusted origins, just replace the name with whatever domain name that you are using. Penguin Chess, just want to make sure I spelled everything right. All right, so this is the non-www version, and then this has that. And then for the AWS access key ID, this is pretty much that user that we created so they can write to our bucket. So the first one is the access key itself, and then the second one is a secret access key. So those are the user credentials. And now the last thing is the name of our bucket. And mine was named Penguin Chess Backend, not chest. Okay. Now just save those. And that's all we actually needed to do to kind of configure our application. So from here, what we can do is we can run docker compose build. And remember, whenever we run this, by default, it is, I'll actually show you the output of this just to show you what it looks like. But by default, it uses that docker compose YAML file, not the docker compose dev file, which we use just for local development. But that's why we don't have to like specify it, because it's like the default already for docker compose. So this is going to go ahead and build those containers, both the database one and our application one. And remember, for our application one, it's using that Docker file in that entry point as well. So that's what's happening right here. Again, it's running this EC working directory, and then it's getting all those like apt, installing poetry, so on and so forth. And now after this, it's gonna install those Python dependencies right here, poetries, installing those. All right, looks like all went well. So from here, now that we have those containers built, we want to spin them up. So docker compose up -d. This is gonna run in daemon mode, which means they are just gonna run in the background, and they are gonna run in the background just because you know, we don't want to have to keep our shell open the entire time. So yes, those are running. And to verify, if you do docker ps, then you can see indeed. Well, this is kind of hard to see. Let me see. All right. Well, this first one right here, this is the application that's using that Docker file. And the second one, this is the database. So we have two containers communicating with each other, just like we wanted. Looking good. And 5.1, okay. Now from here, we do need to do a couple things just to kind of like initialize our app. The first thing we're going to do is create a super user just so we can log into Django admin. So if you do docker exec IT and then paste in the name, and this is probably going to be easier to see on your screen, but I have everything kind of jumbo for YouTube. But docker exec -IT in your container ID and then bin bash. This is going to pretty much allow us to shell into the container. And now what we can do is we can make super user. And then, okay, it's going to ask us for those credentials. And also, this is in the scratch pad that we had earlier. So this was my account number. And for the password, just put in your sign-in key. And all right. Now, another thing that we have to do after this, just one other thing, is that we are going to shell into we're going to shell into Django. And I know this is a kind of shellception here. However, because I'm already shelled into like my EC2 instance, and within my EC2 instance, I'm like shelled into my Docker container, and in my Docker container, I'm going to be shelling into to this Django shell right here. But either way, after you create your super user, right, make shell, and this is going to pop you into Django shellception. A few more shells, I should be able to start a beach. All right, and we are going to run this command from cooking core models import config, and this is just kind of part of the application. It's not going to be part of the process for like most of your normal apps, but just the way I have this cooking social network set up. We're going to run config object. We just need to have one with the owner equals none, transaction fee equals 1. And then from here, we can just go ahead and exit out of the Django shell. And whenever you do this, right, exit with the parentheses right after it. So now we're exit out of the Django shell. We're in the Docker container still. So to exit the Docker container, you right exit without the parentheses. And now we are back into just our regular old server. All right, looking good. Now the next thing we're going to be doing from here is we're going to be setting up Nginx. Now this Nginx setup is actually going to be kind of like a two-step process, I would say. The first thing we're going to do is just enable like basic communication with our server. And that's because later on, we are going to be using certbot to set up HTTPS. However, for that communication, it's basically that it communicates with our server, verifies that we are who we say that we are, and then once we have that set up, we can enable HTTPS. So it's kind of a two-step process, kind of weird, but this is how it's done. So go ahead and remove the default Nginx config that just came with the installation, and we're just going to do sudo nano to write our own Nginx config. By the way, they're like sawing something outside. It's kind of annoying, but whatevs, we'll fight through it. All right, now in here, paste in, just want to make sure it's all good. So paste in the configuration that is going to be included in the link below. Then just save that. So we now have our own custom like temporary configuration for Nginx, and you can just do sudo nginx -t to test that configuration. Make sure your syntax is good and you didn't like miss a bracket or anything. And from here, we actually need to restart Nginx so it can pick up that updated configuration. And that was quick. And the last thing we need to do is run this command right here. And that's going to allow Nginx through our firewall. So rules updated, and yeah, now people can pretty much communicate with our server more or less. So now that this is looking good for now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up this elastic IP, because remember, we are shelled in using this IP. However, because we want to set up our domain name, and if we were to restart this instance right now, we would get a new IP address, which is not that great. We're going to need an elastic IP, which is pretty much just like the naming of it is actually kind of confusing because it's like an IP address that doesnn't change. I don't know, it's probably called elastic because you can point it to different things. But either way, go down here to elastic IPs and click on that. And from here, we can just go ahead and click allocate new elastic IP. And then yes, this is all good. Go ahead and click allocate. Pretty much it's saying like created an elastic IP. And from here, I'm just gonna name it Penguin Chess, just so I can kind of differentiate that. And alright, so once it's selected, what we need to do now is we pretty much have one created, but there is no link to any of our EC2 instances. So to create that link, again, make sure it's selected. And then if you go to actions, associate elastic IP address, then make sure you have instance selected right here. And then for our instance, we can choose this one right here, Penguin Chess Core. And then just click associate that. And now we have a link between our elastic IP, and it pretty much is like a pseudonym, or it references this EC2 instance. And to test that, what we can actually do is, actually it's usually down here. Let me scroll up a little bit. All right, so this was our new IP address that doesn't change. Make sure that you go ahead and copy that, because if all went well, let me actually get a new tab here. Because if all went well, then we should be able to SSH in using our new. So again, this is our elastic IP now. And yes. Okay, looking good. So now let me pull up my fancy little diagram again. So now that we got an IP address that doesn't change, what we'll do now is we'll update our domain name to point to this IP. So I'm going to go ahead and first I'm going to copy this IP address, because during the configuration you need to give it an IP address to point to. But anyways, under your RDS, no, I always get it confused. Route 53, RDS is for our database setup. But under Route 53, go to hosted zone and penguinchess.net. So this penguinchess.net is what we use for the backend. The Penguin Chess IO is what we'll use to host the front end. So users will type in this whenever they're going to the actual site. However, if we just want to hit our API or reference it, then we'll use this. But this is what we're setting up for our EC2 instance, since this is our backend. And I already have an A name, so I can just go ahead and edit this. But if you don't see a name right here, you can just go ahead and create a new one. But anyways, I want to update my A name, and I want to point this to, and I don't need an alias. I just want to point it to this elastic IP. And then I'm going to save that, and it says that it was updated. Cool. So from here, what you can do, let me pull up this in this tab, is we pretty much need to make sure that this domain name is now pointing to our new IP address that we have set. So from here, you can make sure you copy this. Go ahead and open any DNS checker tool. I use this, dnschecker.org. Just paste it in here and hit search. And yes, 44159, that was the one, right? And I just got to double check real quick. Yep, 44159. Okay, so it looks like our DNS settings are updated. So now penguinchess.net is pretty much like a representative of our server right here. And in fact, you can actually, let me open a new tab yet again, and then I can SSH Ubuntu at penguinchess.net. Yes. All right. Pretty sweet, huh? And now that we have our domain name and everything linked up, what we can finally do is request our SSL certificate. And let me actually, one second. Penguinchess.net. I'm just updating my little config file that I'm going to paste in to be the domain, but I'll show you what I'm doing. All right. So the first thing you want to do is you want to run this command and pretty much follow along the prompts. And this is pretty much just This certbot we installed earlier is just gonna, well, this is how you set up your SSL certificate. So for the email address, mine is bucky@hotmail.com. I'm just kidding. It's bucky@newboston.com. That should be my email address though. Do I agree to this? Yes, I definitely read that. Wink, wink. All right, next, would you be willing to share your email address? No, thanks. Just willing to share it on YouTube for everyone to see. And no name. Okay, so this last one is just your domain name. Penguin Chess. Actually, wow, almost messed it up. penguinchess.net. Definitely make sure you don't have any typos in here because they need to verify penguinchess.net. Hit enter, and okay. So while that is doing its thing, all right, looking good. All right, so the next command is this. It's just going to do a dry run of the renewal, and this should make sure that your certificate's auto renewal is set up. All right, dry run, congratulations, our renewal will succeed, yada yada, looking good. All right. So all that is set, and now what we can do is we can actually override that old temporary Nginx configuration and stick in our new permanent one. So in order to do that, kind of the same pattern we did before, we're going to remove the one that was in there, and then we're just going to use nano to create a new one, and then go ahead and paste in this config. And by the way, let me scroll up and show you what you're going to need to replace on here. So in here, you are going to need to replace two little snippets. This right here, and also the line underneath it, replace it with whatever your domain is. So once that's good to go, just go ahead and save this file, hit enter, and all right. And of course, anytime you update your Nginx configuration, the first thing that you should always do is test it, just to make sure you don't have any syntax issues. And then after that, once it's valid, you need to restart Nginx just to pick up that updated configuration. And all right, Nginx is good. Don't have to mess with it anymore. And on that note, I think everything's done. So let me just pop this open. And at this point, we should be able to go to penguinchess.net, and hopefully if we go to admin, all right, looking sweet. And again, you can see that this is indeed over HTTPS, so everything was set up good to go. And now I can just log in with my account number and the sign-in key. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. So yes, that is it's pretty much how you set up the back end. Now in the next video, like I said, even though this is kind of like a Django tutorial series, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting up the front end, because like I said, I got a feeling if you are, digging around in AWS and responsible for deploying your back end, chances are you're going to be responsible for deploying the front end too. So I'll go ahead and show you how to set that up. And after that, you'll actually have your own little social network. So that would be pretty cool. So as always, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.